He was an ordinary teacher from the Dominican Republic, but sadly caused the tragic downfall of a 16-year-old girl's life. What did he do to her and why didn't she want any help? Keep listening to find out. Esmeralda Richiez was born on August 23, 2006, in Higüey, in the province of La Altagracia in the Dominican Republic, located in the Caribbean. That place was famous for its white sandy beaches, coconut palms, lively cities, and rich and complex history, which attracted tourists from all over the world. For the record, Esmeralda's family lived only 30 minutes away from the city, near a famous seaside resort. Her parents, Eligio and Isabel Richiez, were very religious. They were Christians and actively participated in the religious events of their community. They were known, and they were the owners of a small family grocery store. Their small business was running well. Esmeralda grew up surrounded by her family in a small, rural community. The family was important to her, so when she had free time, she could spend it with her family or at the grocery store to help her parents. Although she relieved them and assisted them in their daily lives, she did not aspire to take over the family business. Since she was a child, she has had only one dream: to become a model. She loved taking pictures, singing, and dancing in front of the camera. Born in 2006, she was 4 years old when Instagram was created and 10 years old when TikTok was launched. As much as I can tell you, Esmeralda, just like many girls of her generation, was completely enthralled by social media. Addicted to social media, at the beginning of 2023, Esmeralda was 16 years old and lived with her parents. She was a cheerful and vibrant teenager, described by her friends as having a big heart. She was a caring and attentive girl who always put others before herself. Esmeralda attended the Instituto Agropecuario de Higüey, which was located near her home in La Otra Banda. She was very popular there, especially thanks to her activities on social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram. She shared moments of her life, her outfits, and her makeup, and she was determined to gain recognition on social media. Her efforts had paid off, as she already had over 100,000 followers on TikTok at the age of 16. Esmeralda's life seemed to be going perfectly well. She had a loving and close-knit family and numerous friends, and was highly regarded both on social media and among her classmates and teachers. Unfortunately, Esmeralda never suspected that within her school, which was supposed to be a sanctuary for students, one of her teachers would cause her downfall. On Sunday, February 12, 2023, around 6 p.m., a black Honda car parked in front of Esmeralda's house. This car belonged to John Kelly Martinez, who happened to be Esmeralda's math teacher. John Kelly Martinez was also a native of Higüey and a graduate of the Institute of Research in Humanities at the University of the Caribbean. He was appointed as a math teacher in April 2022 at the age of 35, and he was working at the same school where Esmeralda studied. John was a seemingly ordinary family man, married to a teacher from the same school named Jessie Espinal. The couple had 2 daughters. From the beginning, John got heavily involved in the school and had the ability to connect with his students. Esmeralda immediately liked him because he had a unique style, breaking the distance and speaking more like a friend than a teacher. He was highly regarded by his students, who were accustomed to formal and distant teachers. Esmeralda had even mentioned to her mother, Isabel, several times the charisma of her new teacher and how well he educated them. The teacher, being very pedagogical and motivating, encouraged the 16-year-old girl to work hard for good results. That evening, the 35-year-old teacher, accompanied by his 20-year-old cousin, Ruben Morio Martinez, and 3 other girls from the same class as Esmeralda, came to pick her up for an outing, a sort of educational outing. The math teacher then asked Isabel, Esmeralda's mother, for permission to take the teenager with them. Isabel was hesitant because her husband was not at home, he was at church. Also, it was Sunday and Esmeralda had to attend classes the next day. However, the young girl insisted on her mother, emphasizing that it wasn't a late night and that it would be a great opportunity for her to spend time with her classmates and teacher outside of school. Isabel reluctantly agreed, but with concerns in her mind. She reminded Esmeralda to be back home early as she had school the next day. Little did they know that this decision would lead to a tragic turn of events. Isabel, who was at another place instead of meeting her daughter's teacher, was approached for an outing. She reassured herself by thinking that the teenager was in good company. What could possibly happen to her alongside her teacher, especially since her classmates were also there? The mother then told her daughter to be careful and promised to come back early, to which the young girl responded, "Yes, Mom, don't worry." It was around 7 p.m. when the black Honda carrying Esmeralda, her friends, her math teacher, and her cousin drove away from the teenager's house. Sometime later, Eligio, the girl's father, returned home, and his wife explained the situation to him. Immediately, Eligio didn't take it well. He got annoyed with the situation and was unhappy that his daughter was out at this hour, especially with her teacher. Seeing that time was passing and Esmeralda hadn't returned yet, he decided to call her at 10 p.m. He contacted his daughter, who told him that they were coming back from the beach and would be home soon. Isabel, after the call, got even more irritated. Going to the beach was never part of the plan, especially not at that hour. Almost an hour later, Esmeralda finally returned home with a friend. Right away, her parents noticed that something was wrong. Their daughter had strange behavior, looked very pale, and didn't seem well at all. Her mother worried and asked her what was wrong, but Esmeralda simply replied, "There's nothing wrong, Mom, I'm fine." Isabel, unsatisfied with her daughter's answer, asked her friend what they had done and what had happened. The young girl told her that they had just gone to the beach, gone swimming, and had a few beers, but nothing else. The two friends then headed to Esmeralda's room. Her parents, who had already been uneasy, now became even more concerned and followed their daughter to her room, demanding answers. The two friends sat in silence on the bed while Isabel and Eligio raised their voices and scolded their daughter even more for coming home so late. While being scolded, Esmeralda, who seemed increasingly strange, got up and stood still. It was then that her parents noticed a large blood stain on the bed. Panicked, her mother asked her what had happened and what was wrong, but the young girl reassured her that it was just her menstrual period being particularly heavy that month. After a few back and forth trips to the bathroom, Esmeralda told her parents that she was feeling some pain and wanted to go to bed quickly because she was exhausted. The atmosphere was somewhat strange and tense. The friend who was supposed to stay overnight at the young girl's house thought it was better to go back home and called her father, who immediately came to pick her up. Isabel, to alleviate her daughter's pain, gave her some medicine, and the teenager went to bed. Unfortunately, Esmeralda's parents, thinking that she only had more painful periods than usual, didn't realize the seriousness of the situation. They didn't take her to see a doctor at the hospital, and they would bitterly regret it. The next day, Monday, February 13th, 2023, at 6 a.m. Isabel went to her daughter's room to wake her up for school. She knocked on the door several times, but there was no response. She waited for a moment and then decided to enter her daughter's room, where she discovered Esmeralda's bed empty and completely bloody. She found her daughter lying face down on the bathroom floor, lifeless and stiff, immersed in a pool of blood. Isabel, faced with this infernal scene, let out a heartbreaking scream that woke up her husband and their other daughter. The emergency services were immediately called, but unfortunately, it was too late. Esmeralda was already gone. Around 8 a.m., the body of the young girl was taken to the forensic medical center so that experts could determine the cause of death. For the shocked family, Esmeralda's death was certainly not natural. According to them, the day before, their daughter had been doing very well, and it was only when she returned late in the evening that she had a fever and was bleeding profusely. Isabel was in tears, regretting not having taken her daughter to the hospital. She blamed herself for believing her when she said everything was fine. Something serious had happened to their daughter that day at the beach, and this teacher named John Kelly was certainly not unrelated. They didn't know him very well, but Esmeralda had told them that they had gotten along well and that he had become somewhat of a friend during the school year. They found this relationship somewhat strange, but they trusted their daughter. She had assured them that she didn't have any boyfriends at the moment. The police were informed of the situation and began their investigation to clarify the circumstances of the teenager's death. Meanwhile, her parents discovered a voicemail sent by their daughter to the friend who had accompanied her the previous evening. She sent this message at midnight. In this audio note, they heard the teenager asking her friend for help, explaining that she was bleeding out. Why didn't the young girl ask her parents for help when they had offered to take her to the hospital? What was she hiding from them? What had really happened? The police, actively investigating the case, initially analyzed Esmeralda's phone and discovered several conversations, indicating a much more intimate relationship between the 35-year-old teacher and the teenager than just a teacher-student relationship. The parents of the other girls present during this last outing also handed over their phones to the authorities. The initial investigations on the phones of the three friends revealed that John Kelly had been in constant communication with his students since the night of the incident. He wanted to get updates on Esmeralda. The news of the young girl's death spread like wildfire throughout the city. This tragedy shocked the entire community, and everyone had their own comments. Rumors and hypotheses started circulating, especially on social media, where anonymous testimonies from students flooded the internet, explaining that the intimate relationship between the math teacher and Esmeralda was an open secret at the school. In fact, Esmeralda's older sister, Yermer, revealed that she had also seen her sister with the teacher on several occasions, but when she asked her if there was something between them, Esmeralda vehemently denied any intimate relationship. An audio note, seemingly belonging to the girl who had accompanied Esmeralda home, leaked. In this voicemail, the young girl explained that when they were at the beach that night, she saw the 35-year-old teacher giving Esmeralda 5 pills that made her bleed as if the 16-year-old girl were having a miscarriage. It didn't take much to understand that he had an affair with his student. He had probably impregnated her, and so he wanted to abort the child by giving her abortion pills. This hypothesis, by the way, was nearly identical to that of the family, except for the parents of Esmeralda. They firmly believed that John Kelly had raped their daughter. Fearing the possibility of pregnancy, he allegedly administered abortion pills to her, which ultimately resulted in a fatal hemorrhage. Everyone was eagerly awaiting the results of the autopsy to gain a clearer understanding of the family's situation. They were already under intense scrutiny, receiving new information every hour from their daughter's friends. Through Esmeralda's classmates and various testimonies on social networks, they learned that the 35-year-old teacher had shown inappropriate behavior toward the girl. The police had gathered enough evidence to suspect John Kelly as the primary suspect in this case. On Tuesday, February 14, 2023, the professor voluntarily presented himself to the authorities for questioning. The police also interviewed the friend who had accompanied Esmeralda home that evening. The friend confirmed her previous statements, stating that she had witnessed John Kelly placing pills in Esmeralda's drink. According to her, it was abortion pills because sometime after, the young girl started to bleed. Meanwhile, the professor vehemently denied all accusations, claiming he was being targeted and falsely implicated. He was subsequently placed in prison by Judge Francis, who ordered a 1-year provisional detention for the teacher as the primary suspect in the rape and death of the 16-year-old girl. On Wednesday, February 15th, the funeral of the schoolgirl took place, leaving the parents, family, and relatives of Esmeralda in tears. The parents of the poor girl were concerned and regretted that their daughter didn't trust them or explain what was happening. There was no doubt in their minds that this teacher had killed their daughter. They demanded that justice be served and the responsible person be severely punished. Later that day, the teacher's cousin, Ruben, who was present during the terrible evening, was also arrested. The police questioned him and then arrested John Kelly's wife on suspicion of being involved in the tragedy. The police had strong suspicions about her complicity because, a few days after Esmeralda's lifeless body was found, she had sold her husband's black Honda to a customer she found on an advertising website. The car was seized and examined by the police. Both the seller and the buyer were interrogated and suspected of being accomplices in the murder. However, it was discovered that the sale had been finalized just before John Kelly's arrest. The wife had simply replaced her husband to conclude the sale. Neither she nor the new buyer had anything to do with this terrible tragedy, so they were released and the charges were dropped. This was possible thanks to the testimonies of the 3 classmates who were present that evening, as well as the surveillance cameras. The investigators were able to reconstruct the events of that terrible evening. Here is what happened during that tragic event. The small group consisted of 35-year-old John Kelly, his 20-year-old cousin Ruben, 16-year-old Esmeralda, and her 3 classmates, aged between 15 and 16, all in the black Honda driven by the teacher. Along the way, the teacher decided to change the route and suggested going to the beach instead. The teenagers had been excited, and the car had headed towards Macau Beach, located 30 kilometers from Esmeralda's home in the tourist resort of Bavaro on the east side of the island. Surveillance cameras had captured John Kelly buying beers at a gas station during the journey. After his purchase, he had asked Esmeralda to sit next to him in the passenger seat, so Ruben, his cousin, had moved to the back with the 3 girls. At that moment, one of the girls in the back had seen the teacher put 5 pills in Esmeralda's drink. Once they had arrived at the beach, the 3 girls and Ruben had gotten out of the car and went towards the water. Esmeralda said she would join them later and had stayed in the car alone with the teacher. About 40 minutes later, John Kelly called his cousin Ruben, and the girls returned to the car. Esmeralda had appeared tired, and around 9 p.m. they resumed their journey. However, Esmeralda started feeling unwell and had begun experiencing significant vaginal bleeding. Initially, her friends thought it was due to her menstrual cycle, but the bleeding seemed unusually heavy. The car seat was completely stained, and around 9:45 p.m. the group stopped at a gas station to buy sanitary towels. Accompanied by her friends, Esmeralda, wearing completely blood-soaked clothes, went to the restroom at the gas station. Her classmates and the cleaning lady working at the station were shocked to see Esmeralda passing large blood clots. After purchasing the sanitary towels, the group continued, but Esmeralda's condition had worsened. Worried, her friends asked to take her to the hospital, but she refused. She didn't want her parents to find out, so one of her friends suggested going to her place so that she could at least give her some spare clothes along the way. One of her friends threw out of the car window the young girl's blood-stained blouse and pants while driving. Esmeralda continued to bleed abundantly at 10 p.m., annoyed and worried, asking where she was and when she would return. The 35-year-old teacher, not wanting to bring the young girl back in that condition, had decided to find a pharmacy to get medication to stop the bleeding. They found a pharmacy at 10:20 p.m. and bought medication, water, and sanitary towels. When she arrived home, just before 11 p.m., her mother immediately noticed that her daughter was not well and had changed her clothes. Her parents asked her what was going on and why she was in such a bad state, and when they saw that she was bleeding, they proposed taking her to visit a doctor. The teenager refused and told them she was tired, but eventually she got scolded by her parents. Sensing the heavy atmosphere, her friend had decided to call her father to pick her up. In pain and realizing that she was losing more blood, Esmeralda went to the bathroom around midnight while everyone was asleep. There, in agony, she contacted her friend who accompanied her earlier, but unfortunately, the friend was sleeping and didn't respond. Esmeralda then sent her a heartbreaking voice message. You know the rest. At 6 a.m., her mother woke her up, knocking on her door repeatedly. She wasn't in her room, and a few moments later, her mother found her dead, face down on the bathroom floor. A few days later, the preliminary autopsy report was finally published. The preliminary report indicated that the young girl was a victim of violent sexual activity that had resulted in severe blood loss. Her death was due to vaginal tearing, which caused internal bleeding and hypovolemic shock, preventing her heart from pumping enough blood and leading to her death. The report also mentioned that the young girl had multiple bruises on her body. According to the coroner, Esmeralda wasn't pregnant. The family and loved ones of the young girl were in shock and weren't satisfied with the results. They believed that the pregnancy hypothesis better corresponded to what had actually happened. Experts in the media were raising their voices, explaining that Esmeralda's death wasn't initially defined as criminal. Therefore, the organization responsible for examining the cause of the teenager's death wasn't conducted as thorough an analysis as if it was previously designated as criminal. The parents immediately demanded a new autopsy report, and the family's lawyer explained that everything pointed to John Kelly. The family had eagerly awaited the final report, which would also have included toxicological analyses. They were convinced that Esmeralda's death was due to an overdose of abortion pills given to her by her teacher. The Minister of Education, Riel Hernandez, declared in the media that Esmeralda's death was shameful and should never have occurred. The 35-year-old teacher, on the other hand, remained in preventive custody for at least 1 year, pending the progress of the investigation. His cousin, Ruben, was released but had to report to the police station every month. John Kelly's lawyer had planned to use a controversial strategy to defend his client by accusing Esmeralda's parents of mistreatment, which he believed would explain the bruises and the hypovolemic shock that had allegedly caused her death. He argued that the friend who was supposed to sleep over at Esmeralda's house decided to go home after witnessing the anger of her parents. He added that no one saw any bruises on the young teenager before she returned home. This defense was poorly received by the public. The director of the school where Esmeralda studied explained that John Kelly had only been there for 8 months and he hadn't known him well, but he seemed respected and well-liked by his students. He never thought such a thing could happen and apologized to the family. I find it particularly despicable when individuals use their influence over children, adolescents, or vulnerable people to take advantage of them. John Kelly was a new teacher who was charismatic and easily communicated with his students. He gave the impression of being close to them and gained their trust. The students liked him and found him to be cool. I believe he acted in a way that could have been seen as trying to seduce his young students. They probably had a relationship, otherwise, the young woman would have been thrilled at the idea of accompanying him on that terrible evening. He probably didn't use protection, and he was afraid that the teenager would become pregnant. Besides this sad event, he reignited the debate on abortion on the island. Often, we have the tendency to quickly give credit and trust to people based on their education, whether they wear a suit or are teachers. Unfortunately, on this channel, we know all too well that many of the predators living in our societies were wolves in sheep's clothing, as the saying goes. During the investigation, the police found Esmeralda's bloodied clothes, which had been thrown out of the car window. Along with her clothes, they also discovered a box of abortion pills. Poor Esmeralda had to endure a real ordeal last night. I can't even begin to imagine the suffering she experienced. I don't know what happened between her and her parents after her friend left. However, despite the torment she was going through, she didn't warn them or wake them up. She didn't ask them once. No doubt, she was afraid and ashamed that they would discover she had engaged in sexual intercourse or that she was pregnant while at the hospital. Maybe she preferred to suffer in silence alone rather than talk to them. Esmeralda had gained some notoriety on social networks, which made her very popular in high school but also very vulnerable in the face of predators. She was very active on social networks, posting her first photos on Facebook at the age of 10. Then she discovered TikTok and Instagram. There were videos of her dancing in a somewhat provocative manner at the age of 13. Her sinister math teacher didn't have to look far to find these posts and sexy photos of his young student on the internet. He only had to type her name into the social network search. Today, social media has become an integral part of our daily lives, and the younger generation is fully immersed in it. Unfortunately, many young girls fail to recognize the potential harm of showcasing themselves in such a manner. They felt secure behind their phones in their bedrooms, thinking they were safe from predators. The world, as exemplified by this tragic incident, is not filled only with well-intentioned individuals. We have to be aware of this reality and stop avoiding our responsibilities, particularly when it comes to safeguarding our children. Just because a trend emerged on social media or influencers dressed a certain way, that does not automatically make it right. It was the duty of parents to ensure they imparted proper education, instilled good values, and cultivated self-respect in our highly impressionable children so that they did not perceive these new idols of the modern era as role models and strive to emulate them at any cost. Life is not merely about being as sexy and trendy as possible. Unfortunately, children and teenagers often lack the perspective to see beyond all this. It is the responsibility of parents to understand the new world in order to better protect their children, because having millions of followers does not automatically make an influencer a good role model for the younger generation. Esmeralda also dreamed of being in the spotlight and becoming a social media star. Unfortunately, she became the target of a perverse teacher, a dark figure without ethics or morals. We could also look at her friends, who, at no point, contacted the authorities or emergency services when Esmeralda was in a critical state. I feel sorry for Esmeralda's parents, especially her mother, who let her go that evening. I dare not imagine how much she must blame herself, especially since their last interaction was an argument. I think it must have deeply disturbed them. No matter how nice a teacher may have been, they should not have maintained such relationships with their students. It was not their role to go out with the teenagers they encountered in class on Sunday evenings at the beach or elsewhere. Her parents could never have imagined, even for a single moment, that one of their daughter's teachers could act like this. The family is currently awaiting the final autopsy results. The 35-year-old teacher is still incarcerated and kept separate from other prisoners for his safety. John Kelly's lawyer, on the other hand, seems to want to plead guilty to the relationship held by his client with the student, but he refutes it and shifts the blame for the death onto her parents. Indeed, John Kelly, who is currently accused of rape and murder, faces much less punishment for a sexual relationship with a minor, even if it was forced, than for a homicide. However, many questions and hypotheses still surround this case. Where did the bruises on her body come from? Did John Kelly rape her that evening while everyone was at the beach? I don't know. Tell me in the comments what you think. I hope Esmeralda is resting in peace today, that justice is served to her, and that the guilty party will be judged and convicted. Despite the sadness of this case, I hope you found this video informative. I thank all of you who are still with us at the end of this video, and if that is the case for you, you could write justice for Esmeralda in the comments. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to follow for more crime stories.